Welcome to Awaken Kingdom Culture, where hearts and minds come alive, one story at a time. My name is Ken Karcher, and with me today is my son, Austin. You heard us talk about when we started this podcast, hard to believe, almost 2 years ago, that this was really something that was birthed out of our conversations in a car, coming home from work, just Austin and I talking about life. Well, today's conversation, I can say, was probably birthed last weekend on his porch. And we were sitting outside talking and, just thinking about the realities of day-to-day living in the sports world and also in our faith. So I think you're going to like what we talk about. It's fresh off the press. We don't have all the answers, as we always said, but it's something that we feel comfortable wanting to at least talk about with you and have you think through. But before we get to that, it's been a while since it's just been Austin and I. We've had, I think it was 10 people or couples that have been a part of the last few podcasts, and what a time that has been. And so I want to take a minute just to rehash that a little bit with Austin, see what some of his thoughts were. But, we had 3 different teams. When we have a couple, we always call it a team. So we had 3 different teams of people. We had 2 missionaries that were also a part of our time. And we had an NFL mascot. That's hard to believe, right? An NFL mascot. I think we got some more coming, but I'm not going to tell you who. And then also we had multiple stories of redemption. Austin, what were some of the podcast guest stories that really touched your heart?
Well, first off, each story was valuable to me, and just the time that we got to spend with each and every one of them. But the few that jumped out to me were, obviously the Castilles. First we talked with Jeremiah, and then we talked with his 2 sons, both Simeon and Caleb. And, it was just great to see the work that God does through one person and how it multiplies into generation after generation and after generation. Just the faith that Jeremiah has in our Father and how that has multiplied into just 2 of his many kids that he has. And then, we also had some conversations with Chris Hirschfield and Seth Riker. Chris was just a beautiful story of God's work through pain, some heartbreak, and just restoration, and how God is continuing to use things that we think, end our story, and he uses it to bring life and hope as we move forward into our real eternal story. And then also, like I said, Seth Reichard, that was just a great conversation. One of your former players, we haven't been in touch in a while, and just to hear what he's doing and just his awesome heart and how he goes into his own community, but also into the world and loves people and shares the gospel was very inspirational to me, and something that I really look up to him because he's not, famous in the eyes of probably the world, but what he's doing for the kingdom is, something of great value.
Yeah, I think of Jeremiah for a second. You talked about, his story, and I think of the coaches, right? He was coached by Bear Bryant. He worked with Nick Saban and really took us along that journey of how those guys think and operate. And that was really, really good. And but we talked about a couple teams. I mean, we had Team Murphy, Gene and Dot Murphy. They were competitors, I guess, against me in the 10 years I was in Mississippi JUCO. But just what a sweet spirit, first woman coach. She had a great legacy in basketball. So that was a great discussion. We had Team Parker, Dennis and his son. Dennis was the first coach to hire me in my coaching career. So that was really a lot of fun to be able to talk to him. And then we also had Darren Slack, who is a man after your own heart. He was like the founder of QB development, and he had started that many years ago. But now he's
I missed that one, Dad.
yeah, but he's a missionary now. He goes into South America, and just amazing the story that God did with him. And then we went back to my relationships in 1990. Hard to believe. and we had the KC Wolf, Dan Mears, mascot for the Kansas City Chiefs, first mascot. And that was really a lot of fun. We even had your two kids involved at the beginning where they were able to see some of his special stuff. So as you said, we are always blessed. I look forward to Sundays when we record because it's just an amazing opportunity to hear people share their life and how they want to share their life. And it's been a fun, like today's number 88, me and you, number 88. So it has been a lot of fun. We're approaching that 100. I'm working on a special guest for 100. Yeah, today will be fun. So those were some of our podcasts the last 10 weeks. And so today, to kick it off, we're going to throw some names at you that are very popular. You're going to be well aware of these names because we want to talk about some things that I think will challenge and encourage all of us. Everyone's heard of Arch Manning because of the legacy of the Manning name. There was Archie Manning. Actually, Archie was a friend of mine when I was in college. We used to throw together. He was with the Vikings and the Saints. Then you have Peyton Manning. Everyone knows him. You have Eli Manning. And then there was this conversation about Arch Manning and all that he was going to do at Texas. He waited 2 years, and here was his opening day opportunity at Ohio State. So we had all kind of talk about Arch Manning and the Manning family. Then we had talk also over the last week about Kalen DeBoer, the new head coach at Alabama. Last year was his first year, 8-4 season. How can you not have comparison to Nick Saban, right? Probably one of the greatest coaches ever. And so there was a lot of conversation about Caleb and Nick and what's going to happen this year. And so we're going to get into that. I think you have some others too, Austin.
Yeah, and that same weekend, which, spurred our conversation was, Clemson, they played LSU, and obviously there's the Dabo Sweeney and Cade Klubnik conversation that's out there. Just, one with Dabo, his stance on, NIL and, the portal and all that stuff, but also just, the expectation that went into this season with their big name quarterback and, his getting ready to have a great year and get ready to, be one of the top picks in the NFL draft. So there was a lot going into that game, and for it to go the way it did was kind of a letdown. And then there's also Bill Belichick, arguably the greatest coach of all time. He's now the head coach at University of North Carolina. He had his first college debut, game, which, what is he, 73? To be coaching football for as long as he has and this to be his first college game is unbelievable. But for what his clout and his accomplishments in the NFL, he had great expectation going into that first game. And it was probably, if from his own words, would probably be a nightmare from his experience. And just, you and I being in those shoes of having great games, but also having some of those difficult moments that some of these people we just talked about had to walk through this weekend. It makes you think about what's going on in their heart, what's going on in their mind, and what is the enemy using to speak about their identity, where their faith is and their hope in the midst of some of these challenges. Because once again, here's the beautiful thing about sports. There's another game the next week, but now you got to hear it from the fans, the media, and you start to question yourself. I don't care how accomplished you are. You want to defend yourself and prove that you're worthy. So a lot of those things were things that we began to talk about last weekend as we were watching those series of events unfold.
Yeah, you think just because you hire Bill Belichick, you're going to win, but it shows you that just because you have this top name coach, it requires a lot of other things. But there were two words we wanted to hit on here a little bit deeper as we move into our time together today that we talked about on your back porch. And I'm going to talk about one of them and you'll hit the other one. And the first one is expectation. It's a burden in many ways. Arch Manning, they had great expectations. So he's carrying this burden going into the game. It's not, you can say all you want to say, it's on his mind. He's been hearing it for weeks, for years. And so what is it? What is an expectation? Well, I looked up a definition. It just, an expectation is a strong belief or assumption that something is going to happen in a specific way. Well, life doesn't work that way, right? If it did, we'd all make sure we got what we wanted. But it's also an expectation is something that is based on a past performance. Arch Manning had this great high school career. The couple games that he got into last year, which in a cleanup duty, I think, or one of the guys got hurt for a little bit. He played a game. Well, everyone saw that he did last year, and they figured, well, he's playing Ohio State, be a little bit different, but he's going to have all this success based on a past performance or outside pressures, personal desires. These are all things that play into expectations, and it projects this predetermined outcome. And I know we've talked about this in our family. Some of the characteristics of an expectation is that there's a condition. If I do A, I'm going to get B. Well, I know you and I think we can speak very openly. We've done A sometimes and got F.
Yeah.
And so, conditions are not guaranteed. A lot of time you're outcome focused. You hear Nick Saban talk about all the time. It's about the process, right? It's not about what the outcome is at the end of the day, but that's what expectation does. Expectations are usually externally driven as well. There's that conversation or opinions of others. I'm sure later on we'll talk about, whose opinion really matters and what is his opinion of us. And then it ultimately leads to what? Disappointment, right? Because if you don't reach all those things that have been said about you or that you've said on yourself, and you don't get that predetermined outcome that you thought you'd get, frustration, anger, you start to lose confidence. There's a lot of things that occur. If we could get inside an Arch Manning's mind or Bill Belichick's mind before the game and after the game, it'd be real interesting to see what their thought patterns would be. So, how does expectation, though, then affect those that are so-called believers in Christ, or people today would say, that's a Christian coach or a Christian athlete? Tying your identity, you mentioned that word, we'll get into it again, tying your identity to an external expectation, it's really a trap. Yeah. An athlete's performance falls short of those expectations of himself or others. Then next thing you know, you're dealing with, you feel like you have public shame or personal failure. And all of a sudden, this leads you to believe your identity is really tied to your performance. And that's a dangerous place for someone that's a believer in Christ. So we'll look more at this, but that's a little bit about expectation. So Austin, talk to us a little bit about what now anticipation really is.
Well, just following up on what you're saying about expectation, Dad, the thing that jumps into my heart when I hear that is expectation is the great joy killer. It's the great joy killer. Because even if you are successful, even from the world's eyes, you can step and be disappointed because you didn't meet those expectations. I think back to my own little career, Dad, and this, not many people do, but I was a backup quarterback until my senior year in high school, and so there was these expectations for my senior year that I had to be whatever would get attention quickly. So if you remember there, I forget where we were, but it was asked, what is a goal that you have going into the season? And one of the things that I wanted to do was to throw 70 touchdown passes. Why? What was so magical about that? Well, it was one of the top numbers of amount of touchdowns that a quarterback could throw in a season, that has thrown in a high school season. Well, why did I want that? I wanted to get people's attention quickly. Well, what ended up being a very successful and good high school senior season, it was always less than what I was hoping for, because my expectation was this astronomical number. And what the result was, it was never good enough, even though I had a very good season. Ended up throwing 14 touchdown passes and, breaking school records and, being written about in newspaper. It wasn't enough because I did not meet what my expectation was initially. So with that said, what I've learned over time is expectations robs the ability to enjoy the moment. And that's where that brings that second part of the question, or the second word that we're going to look at, is anticipation. Because where expectation brings a burden, and it also can steal joy, and also can cause constant disappointment because you're not enough or you lack, anticipation does the opposite. It creates freedom. It creates hope. It creates something that you're looking forward to, that you can walk to with open hands. As we prepared for this, Dad, and thinking about anticipation, that simple comment of open hands really stuck out to me. Is like, I prepare all week. I plan, I do my best with my effort and my preparation, which that was something you always preached to me growing up, Dad, is what you can do, what you can control, your preparation and effort. Well, I do that all throughout the week, but then I got to go into, instead of going into a game like this, I go into a game like this with open hands, saying, God, I've done I've used the gifts and talents, and I've prepared the best I can and given the best effort I can. Now, I give this performance to you. All glory to God. But what is all glory to God? Sometimes we get that twisted. Does it always mean that I'm going to go out and throw 5 touchdowns? Because what I've learned is, through a lot of pain and suffering, has the glory been given to God the most. So as I walk into the game, I open my hands up and say, God, I give you what I've prepared for. I ask that you use it how you desire to use it. And as we talk later, it's going to connect to, someone a lot greater than I, with the same type mindset of the open hand. So what are some key characteristics that go into anticipation? Well, one, it has a sense of unconditional, meaning like, regardless of great performance, mediocre performance, or maybe even failure, okay, I have the ability to stand moving forward. I have the ability to be present in that moment and understand that there's a good Father that's walking with me, that can walk through this and bring good out of whatever the circumstance is. The second thing is present focused. Where expectation lives in the future, anticipation, you're able to be in the moment, which all great coaches talk about process. Well, process is learning how to be in the moment. Well, anticipation allows you to do that because you're just excited about being where you're at in this moment. Oh, I got a big game right here. Oh, it's third down. I got to, I have an opportunity to execute and be able to help my team, or be able to, I got a really good play call here. We're going to get them right here. It's just a different mindset of excitement and joy of being where you're at in the moment. The next thing is internally driven, whereas expectation is about meeting oftentimes other people's, thought processes or desires for their team, or what they want you to do or think you should do. Anticipation is something that, hey, I've put in a lot of work. I'm excited to see the fruits of what I put into this thing. And remember, it's not always a physical outcome. It could be perseverance or hope or intangible traits that come from whatever you're about to walk through. And then the last thing is, it leads to peace. And I want to follow peace and step into where peace is. And anticipation allows me to be at peace, because at the end of the day, I play a role, but I'm not in ultimate control. Because once again, the beautiful thing about football, but pretty much all team sports, is it's not just on you. As a quarterback, you learn very quickly. My success is tied to my offensive linemen, my running back, my receivers, my defense. All those things play a role into my success. And so for me, God has really been working on, and is continuing to work, to get me to think about transitioning from expectation into more of an anticipation mindset. So What do you think, Dad? What are your thoughts on both ends of the spectrum?
Well, it's I think we've said it is that when you have this expectation that you're gonna got to meet this goal, you're gonna be a lot more tied up as a player for sure. And as you walk that out in your faith, it's going to be harder to believe what Papa's saying about you because you're listening to the noise and the voices outside. I think of game day. Game day is very popular now. It went from, I think, originally when I was younger, 30-minute show to now it's about 4 hours before the game starts. And they have guests coming in, and it's just really become entertainment. They had the whole deal about Lee Corso last week before the game, and him putting on the head for the last time of the Buckeye, and so it's become a big show. But in that show, I think it's easy to forget that they're talking about people, and they're talking about this guy could do this, Arch Manning is this, Bill Belichick is this, Caleb. Klubnik is this, whoever it is, they're giving an opinion and an assessment all the time, every week, from week one going in, here's what he's going to be. And then all of a sudden, listen to it yesterday about Arch Manning. Well, he fell from the number one draft prospect. Texas fell from number one. 1 week. And all of a sudden it changes. And what changed it? His performance. He's the same guy.
Yeah.
He didn't change.
Yeah.
Bill Belichick's the same coach that was at the Patriots.
Yeah.
But one performance changes opinions, outcomes, approval. All of a sudden there's comparison. We start talking about competition, which I think is another whole topic in itself because, competition isn't just about the scoreboard. Competition is about a relationship of two people working, striving together on something. So, there's just so many things we're going to dig into here in the next, might be 2 weeks. I don't know. We'll see how this goes. But I think game day is a great picture of that. And I know you want to tie this now to a different twist that people probably aren't thinking about.
Well, this has kind of been on my mind for probably a few months now. But it really resonated with me being a coach. And so as we were talking last week, Dad, this was something that came to mind when we were talking is just about Jesus and Holy Week. And I think it's a perfect picture of the story of a coach. Because as a coach, I've always heard that, someone told me a story one time. He said, like, you take a job and like somebody, you sign your contract or whatever, and they give you a blank envelope, or they give you like an envelope with something in it. And he said, "Don't open this yet. Okay, I'll tell you when to open it." And then you go through, however many years you get. You have some good years, you have some bad years, and then finally the day comes, and you're at a spot where nobody likes you and you're fired. And that guy gives you a call and says, "I want you to open that envelope." He opens the envelope and it says, "Today you've been fired. I want to remind you, you're the same coach that you were, the day that we signed the contract, with you." And just to sit there and know that this profession, or really bigger than this profession, the world we live in, works this way for everybody. I mean, to me, and before I get into the actual thing that we're talking about, is Bill Belichick is the perfect example. If he doesn't have immunity after what he's accomplished, no one has immunity. No one has immunity. So as a coach, why would we think that, the negative will not come along the road with the positives as well? But anyways, so I say all that to say, Jesus in the Holy Week. This is the perfect picture of him riding into town, them laying palm branches down, yelling, "Hosanna, Hosanna, the King is coming." and then being escorted out of the town, which is very interesting because he comes into Jerusalem, but then he takes the Via Dolorosa out of the town to where they're spitting on him and yelling crucify in 1 week. In 1 week, they flipped on him. They completely flipped on him. Is that not coaching? Is that not playing? It's a bad performance of something you don't want to hear comes out of their mouth, or an action they do that you don't like. People flip on you, and that's the beautiful thing is I think Jesus gives us a beautiful picture of how to navigate and walk through the performance or the expectations or the perspective of people. You just be the same person, as you're coming in, but also as you're walking out, you're the same person, but the way people view you and treat you are completely different. And I think his humility, his silence at times, his ability to continue to speak truth in the midst of the challenge shows the depth and complexity of our Father's heart, that he knows the fickleness of human beings and how they sway with good performance, bad performance, what I like, what I don't like. And I think consistency and the ability to stand in the midst of that and ride the waves leads us to the beautiful thing of the resurrection, where he ultimately conquers the greatest obstacle of all humanity, which is death. But he did that by riding the waves of people's opinions, knowing and being reminded through the Spirit of who he is, the Son of the living God, who has power and authority over all things, regardless of who's spitting on him or who's whipping him or nailing him to the cross. So to me, I think learning how to live out of what Christ lived out of is the answer to navigating the challenges that us as coaches face of this fickle performance-based reality we live in. Because we have a great opportunity to share the gospel, to bring hope to people, and to teach people to be resilient, how to stand, and how to overcome, just like Jesus did. But we live in a world that tells us not to anymore, and that once you fail, you're done for. So what we're about here at When Awakening is reminding you that isn't who you are. You're not judged by the last performance. You don't have to believe that truth. You can hang on to a rock that can withstand it all. And why that's valuable is because you get in front of kids in the next upcoming week and you get to speak life and hope when the enemy is attacking them. And if you don't have that identity, then you're not going to be able to stand and speak hope and truth and life. You'll be just like every other fan or every other person that jumps on the bandwagon. But what's awesome, we've all been it. And this is, I'm a Bronco fan. They play this week. I'm excited about it. You know what's great about winning the Super Bowl, Dad, when you're a Broncos fan, is when you've gone through 8 to 10 years of not even making the playoffs. And then you finally stuck with them and they go and do it. Well, I think that's the thing is learning how to stand in the midst of a storm to get to the other side, because God's always working good.
Well, let's look at, you mentioned the Holy Week, but I'm going to take it day by day to set up our conversation that we'll have in a minute of how this experience that Jesus has gone through is very similar to an athlete and a coach and what they go through day to day. Obviously, no one hopefully is being crucified literally like he has, but very similar thought process. So we already mentioned Palm Sunday, right? The triumphal entry, Hosanna, Hosanna. And then you go to Monday, which he returns to Jerusalem and his authority is being asserted. Tuesday, Jesus starts teaching in the temple and he's debating all the religious leaders. So as I'm sharing this day-to-day process that he's going through, be thinking about your day-to-day week of a game week. Wednesday, it's Judas' betrayal. Unfortunately, in this profession, guys have experienced betrayal, either someone on their own staff, someone on the outside, an alumnus talking. There's guys that are listening to this today that'll be able to relate to that.
Yeah.
Then Thursday is the Last Supper. It's bringing that team together. It's going to wash their feet. And they serve one another, which is critical for a great team. Friday, Jesus is arrested. He's tried, he's scourged, he's crucified, and he dies. Now, in the eyes of the world, I've said this before to guys, Austin, I'll say, if Jesus was a coach, would have he been declared a winner, a loser, or just outright victorious?
On Friday, I'd say a loser.
That's right. In the eyes of the world, he's a loser, right? But he just outright victorious. Saturday, they lay him in the tomb, right? It's over, done. He lost. The people are his disciples. What's going on? And in that, there's a day of waiting. You and I have talked a lot about there's some things we're waiting on right now, right? Waiting's not fun.
Sunday meetings, Dad. You're waiting for those Sunday meetings as a coach. What are they going to say about this?
It's that day of reflection, right? We've talked about this with our kingdom coach mentality. When you're reflecting, are you able to see as a kingdom coach? Are you able to see through that performance the day before? Was Steve Sarkisian able to see through Arch Manning's performance and recognize growth? Tom Brady made that statement. He came out and he says, I'm not alarmed by anything. He said, these are moments you have to go through to become a great quarterback.
Yeah. So
seeing through your players, your coach's performance and recognizing growth. Well, that's reflection, anticipating his resurrection, right? We're anticipating with each other that we're going to improve.
Yeah.
It doesn't guarantee you're going to win every game, but we're going to improve. There's that statement that the great teams make the biggest jump from week 1 to week 2. But growth is a continual process. So that was Saturday. And then Sunday, you've mentioned it, Resurrection Day, celebration. And we're not saying that means you're going to win every football game. We know that. You're not going to. But what does resurrection look like when you're talking about victory? Can you be victorious as an athlete and a coach, even in the midst of a loss? We think when awakening, the answer is yes. So that's a picture of Jesus's Holy Week. And now we want to take, 5 or 6 parts, I think, here just to talk about in our last 15 or 20 minutes together. And the first was we go back to day 1, Palm Sunday, and the triumphal entry that Jesus makes. There's this, you mentioned these words, there's hype, there's unrealistic expectations, right? It's game day. It's game day making those unrealistic expectations of people, coaches and players. It's Arch Manning and others that we've just talked about. So what was Jesus's experience coming in here? Well, they're the jubilant crowd, right? They're yelling, Hosanna, Hosanna. Why? Because they thought that he was the political Messiah. They thought he was going to be the king to overthrow Rome.
Yeah.
And so that's why all this is going on. There's this cheering. Well, in the same way, what are some in your mind, and I know I have a couple, what are some of the athlete and coach's expectations, Austin, that we can run into with this day 1 triumphal entry?
I'll start. This one's kind of one you're probably not thinking about, but Patrick Mahomes. What's interesting about Patrick Mahomes and what you'll find about most athletes, you'll get to a spot when people learn to expect your gifts, like his magic throws or his across field when you're sprinting this way, or just his clutch his clutch ability to be clutch in difficult moments. What happens is people start to stop valuing what you do. They expect it, And then what
Hmm.
ends up happening is they end up not liking you for what you've been just doing consistently over time. If I'm not a Chiefs fan because I'm a Broncos fan, like I said, but it's amazing how many people in this last Super Bowl are cheering against them because they've won so many times. And all he's done was be consistent of who he is, and people are get tired of it. So there's that expectation of you've reached your pinnacle, but then there's those expectations of, you know, um, we need to be perfect. I live in Alabama, so the expectation for Alabama every year, and a lot of credit goes to Nick Saban and his process and how he's built that program and been consistent. Is we win out all the time. Well, what that hinders, I think, is the ability to grow as a team because you feel like you should already have arrived or been there. But if you ever listen to Nick Saban, he was all about process and growing and starting a new team every year. And to me, quite frankly, Kalen DeBoer walks into one of the most challenging jobs out there
Hmm.
because of the expectation he carries. Nick Saban didn't walk into that type of pressure at Alabama. He built that. And so you sit there and you say, um, there's that circumstance of, there's no room for imperfection or mistake, and because of that, if you don't give freedom to fail, you end up hindering growth because you're not, you, people lose heart as opposed to taking those challenging moments and building off of them. So those were the two that just kind of jumped out to me, Dad, of just, um, you know, uh, kind of expectation walking into something.
I thought of just two realistic examples that we've all done as players and coaches. Nowadays, they make a big deal. They show that team walk, right? Your team is walking through the crowd on campus and people are high fiving you and you're the greatest. And this is what, 4 hours before the game, right?
Yeah.
I don't think unless there was an opponent's fan in the crowd, probably not one negative statement is being made to Dabo Sweeney or Bill Belichick as they're leading their team through.
Yeah.
And then you have game day follow it, right? Game day says all their stuff, but then there's that game day tunnel experience. Now the team's dressed. It's 10 minutes before the game. You're in the tunnel. People are cheering you on, just like they were Jesus coming in, right? The triumphal entry.
Yeah.
And then for 4 quarters, the fans get to judge the heck out of you. He's a bum. He's good. He's bad. He's this. He should have threw it. He's throwing it sidearm. He should do this, should do that. And it's like, well, wait a minute now. Where did that 30 minutes ago go?
Right.
Well, it's all on performance.
Yeah.
It's Arch Manning, as I said earlier, he's the same guy prior to the Ohio State game as he is yesterday.
Yeah.
And yet we get looked at as both Christians, as coaches, as athletes. Jesus did himself. And it's judged on their performance. Well, Jesus, you didn't take over as our king. Bill, you didn't win the first game. And next thing you know, we're slapped with labels. Overrated, not ready, can't win the big one. So what Jesus experienced, as we see all through the scriptures, is just the microcosm of what we go through in a day-to-day walk of life.
Yeah.
All right, let's look at the second piece of Jesus's Holy Week, and that is talking about the temple in his teaching and navigating internal and external conflict, right? In the days following his entry, he continues to confront what's going on in the temple. He overturns the tables. He's driving the money changers out. And then spends time teaching and debating with the religious leaders, the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And what are they always trying to do, right? They're trying to trap him.
Yep.
They're trying to get him to say something they can say, we got you.
It's like a press
So
conference, Dad.
That's right. There it is. Right there's the example. Go on that a little bit. That's a great example.
Well, before I get to that, just thinking about Jesus in the temple. he wasn't what they expected there, right? They were expecting this guy who's about to bring the Jewish people together to take over Rome. Remember, that's why they were saying Hosanna as he's walking in that week. But he flipped script there. He actually exposed the hearts and the minds of the people that were in the temple defiling it, which who knew the heart of the Father better than Jesus? No one, right? So for him to know what the Father desired in that temple area and to sit there and be disgusted by, them, selling, things there and making money and just the things that were going on. And he went and scourged it and basically cleansed it is spiritually kind of what happened there. But think about perception change. That blew their mind. That was not what they were thinking he was coming in about, So that was just something. The start of a change of mind starts happening during this day. Well, think about maybe a first quarter, a call that a coach makes, or a decision a quarterback makes, or a busted coverage that a defensive back makes. Or, those things start to change your mind about your team a little bit. Okay, you start to question. But then back to the press conference, I don't know why that popped in my mind, but think about it. Why did we ask zillions of questions? And even, quite frankly, some of them are dumb questions. They're questions that, well, we didn't play well. Me as a coach, obviously, I take responsibility for it. I'm going to do everything in my power, humanly possible to try to make correction. And we actually have to coach players and coaches how to address the media, because you don't want to throw people under the bus. You also want to answer the question so you don't sound unintelligent, but you also don't want to give out too much information because they'll take it and spin it and run with it. You don't want to create one word. So you're literally, they're trying to trap you just like those Pharisees. And this, for those of you who maybe never have read through the Bible, I mean, what happens is the Pharisees are trying to trap Jesus. And one of the questions they ask about the coin. Whose face is on the coin? And they do it there during this week, because once again, they know Jesus by now. They know Jesus isn't, starting this revolution, but the people, they're all on Jesus' side. So how did the Pharisees start to get Jesus to lose some of his fans? They ask him a question that says, are you sympathizing with Rome? And Jesus, who is going to speak the truth and is going to say, I'm worried about the Father's heart, not about Rome. Well, that hurts his fans, right? His fans think he's about to overthrow Rome and become the Messiah of their mind, as opposed to God's Messiah who conquered sin and death. And so, just sitting there thinking, as the media plays a role in trying to trap coaches into sound bites so that they can talk for the next week and criticize and judge and put value and on their team, but specifically that person. And obviously, all this is doing what? Forming people's opinions and what is good, what is evil, what is right, what is a winner, what is a loser. Because we're dualistic. That's humanity. We want to place value on everything. That's
sounds like
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, it sounds like worldly wisdom, right? Which we've all have lived by and lived under at times. But you got these external experts telling you that this is what the way it should be, and all of a sudden you're getting 1 minute you're being praised for your decision making, and the second later you're also being criticized. With that comes anxiousness, anxiety, causes people to do many things. I think of when Jesus was in the boat, right? And his disciples see this massive storm coming and they're like, what are we going to do? And you're sleeping. And I'll never forget his comment. He says, why are you afraid? Have you not learned to trust me yet?
Ooh, that hits me.
And I think that speaks to all of us. I know it does me, and you just said it does you. I mean, when we're in the midst of the worldly wisdom that's offered, whether it be, we're talking sports, tied with our faith. But whatever your walk of life is, whatever your job is, whether you're at home raising children or you have an outside job, it's not your performance that brings you the peace. It's not your performance that's going to fulfill the expectation. And you don't have to live under an expectation of others. So we'll look more at that as we continue to go. And the next piece of the week was the Garden of Gethsemane. And Jesus goes there, and we talk about the burden of the moment and isolation. This is the night before his crucifixion, and Jesus goes to the garden to pray, and he's knowing what's going to happen. He's in agony. And we've talked a lot about suffering, even in our own family right now. And he's praying for God. He says, take this cup from me. This is the Son of God asking, take it from me, please. Yet he submits to his will. And his closest friends and disciples who had promised to stand by him. Now, think about that, huh? Think about the AD coming out and saying, I'm behind him 100% as my head football coach. And then 3 weeks later, well, we're going to have to go in a different direction. They fall asleep. And he feels the weight of the world's sin, and the loneliness, the Son of God, lonely. In this isolation, we talked about waiting a little bit ago. I think in the game of football, I think of a timeout, right? Jesus was taking a timeout in the Garden of Gethsemane. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think you hit some very key words: the weight of the world, isolation, alone, people turning their backs on you. I mean, it's just because right before he goes out to the garden, he's doing the Last Supper with his disciples, his teammates, like the pregame meal, and he's prepping them, speaking truth into them, telling them, hey, I mean, talk about that that pregame talk. It wasn't super positive. You know what I mean? He's talking about like people are going to hate you because they hate me. You know what I mean? We're that's not motivational. But what I think he was motivating them to be able to stand, as opposed to, to give false hope. Like, I don't know. It's just, you and I we played football long enough, Dad, and coached it long enough. There's games that, you guys are, it's equal competition, and we're going to go out and play. You ask the coach at ULM going against Alabama this upcoming week, right, that they just played. How's he going to speak hope into them? What about that coach? Where you have enough experience as a coach, you don't have the guy that's going to win at the X versus single coverage, and they can double over there, and they don't have to load the box to stop your run game. But you got to find a way with the same schematics that they're going to use to make your team execute. It's just, but we create this illusion that this person's a better coach, when the pieces aren't equal. Very rarely are the pieces equal. That's why the NFL is the best, in my opinion, is because the NFL, they're the closest to equal they are in all of sports, or all of football at least. But anyways, I know I got off track a little bit, but basically you get into the garden, and he knows what he's about to walk into. Here's the thing, Dad. Jesus knew what he was about to walk into as they're throwing those palm trees down. He knew how people would flip because he knows human nature, and he knows the hearts of minds of everybody. So he's sitting there knowing, well, you just haven't heard what I'm about to tell you because it's going to burst your bubble. And he still says the truth because he knows it's true. Well, as a coach, sometimes we have to speak hard truths to our players. And we also are going to walk into difficult situations. And we got to create mindsets and process and hope and help them grow in the midst of all these things surround. Why does Nick Saban make a comment about rat poison? Because he knows that kills growth, right? Because he understands that when you start focusing on other men, you're going to jump ship, or you're going to leave, or you're going to not be able to get to the other side, which is growth, which can lead to winning on the scoreboard. So the Garden of Gethsemane, I know we're both butchering that. It's just it talks to the truth of what we all can hold on to in these moments. He didn't go to his disciples, his followers. He went to his Father, because his Father was the rock that was going to be able to help him stand in the moment coming up. And that's where we have accessibility to that Father, each and every one of us. But so often we place our hope in a man's opinion or a woman's opinion. And in a performance-based world, you're not going to stand with that.
Well, I hope you're enjoying our podcast today, but I'd like to take a minute to thank our sponsors. Our nonprofit organization, The Win Awakening, is the reason we're able to have this podcast. The Win Awakening is a sports ministry network that began in November of 2022. The Win mission is to encourage and empower leaders to live from a place of victory as they awaken to their wholeness and true identity within environments where they can be known. Our goal is to create safe environments where transparency and vulnerability are accepted, and value and worth are recognized in an atmosphere of love. If you'd like to support the Win Awakening, as well as our podcast, you can donate now at winawakening.org, and please spread the word about our ministry with your friends. Don't forget to follow, like, and subscribe to Awaken Kingdom Culture on our Spotify and YouTube channels, to listen or watch our podcast weekly, every Wednesday at 9 a.m. Eastern. And if you'd like to follow my socials, as well as hear about the upcoming podcast news, watch the latest clips, and get an inside look at my life behind the scenes, you can follow us on Instagram at Awaken Kingdom Culture and Facebook, Awaken Kingdom Culture Podcast. Well, let's get back to the podcast. The next one is the betrayal, the trial, the crucifixion, dealing with labels, scrutiny, the public failure. Jesus is betrayed by a close friend. Like I said, unfortunately, we've many of us have lived through one of those. He's arrested, he's put on trial, and then the same crowds that were Hosanna and cheering him on days earlier, right? They're now yelling, crucify him. They strip him of his dignity, they mock him, they give him a crown of thorns. This whole label of King of the Jews is used to mock him. His performance is a public spectacle of suffering. And as you and I've talked off the air, and we may have mentioned it, but I know when I hear that word suffering, I've come to understand suffering in such a new light. It doesn't make it any easier, but I really now see suffering as Papa's way of removing everything in our life that is not of love's kind. So as we're wrestling and suffering with things going on in our life, and some are very excruciating, it's his way out of his love to remove some things. Like for me, maybe it's control. I'm suffering because I'm trying to control something I can't control. I'm anxious. I'm not able to rest. And he's allowing that suffering to happen for me to say, I can't do it on my own. I can't control it. And he's removing that because it's not of love's kind. He don't want me in control. He wants me dependent. Amen. And so Jesus is feeling this, and there's others that are saying, just zap Judas, just zap him. You could do whatever you want, right? Come down off that cross. And I think of the statement, Jesus makes the statement, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they're doing. He asked that before he even dies. Yeah. They're spitting on him. They're making fun of him. And he's asking Papa, forgive them, for they know not what they're doing.
Wow.
Thoughts on that betrayal, trial, crucifixion stuff, labels that he's been given?
Well, Dad, you know so much about our ministry is identity, right? That's the middle of the win, right?
Yes.
Um, and if you've listened to any of our stuff, I mean, we're trying to really, get to the heart of that, as we continue to grow and live in that. This over the last year, God has really, really used from the time Jesus is betrayed to the time he gets to the cross. God has really spoken to my heart about Jesus and his identity and the identity that I have access to. You know, Jesus, we got to remember now, had all authority and power over all things. He was there when it was created. He knew everything from the beginning. Have you ever felt like you were a coach that had a really, really good skill set and you had, what it took to be successful? What do you want to do when people start questioning that or doubting that? I don't know about, just speaking from my own life experience, the first thing I want to do is defend, give examples, pull out a list,
Proof.
show proof. It says, I wish I had the verse on top of my head, but this is coming from the Spirit. This isn't of, so I didn't prep this, but it's just what happened is Jesus humbled himself in the moment and spent time with the Father in the midst of the chaos going around him. And he said, I don't have to defend myself, prove my authority, get off this cross, show that I'm the king, because I am the king.
Mm.
That's identity. And that is what we are praying that we can live out of, our families can live out of, and for you as the coach that is in front of 100 eyeballs or however many eyeballs can live out of. Because that's when the best coaching is done. That's when Jesus, let's remind ourselves. I've probably used this before, but I think it puts it in perspective. The Roman Empire the Romans conquered the world at that time. And they have a spot in history. They were in charge of all these different countries. Did that last? Are they still in charge? No. One man who died on a cross. We go to people all across the world go on Sundays to worship him. That's creating authority and understanding this is a moment in time. This is a circumstance in time. Just like one Saturday is a moment in time. But my identity can stand in it because my hope is not in people's opinions. It's in the love of God and the Father and the Spirit. And my authority, I don't have to prove it to anyone. The ability to just walk through it, guess what? He knows God works good. And we're going to get to that good here very shortly in time. And so his ability just to take it, Dad, I think shows his identity. And by the ability to take it, I think brought more loyal followers than Roman followers. If you know, I know I'm not saying that perfectly, but basically he has impacted the world in a way that the Romans tried to through force. He did it through humility and being mocked and spit upon, knowing who he was. And he said, I don't have to prove it. In time, my Father will prove it with me. And that's where we're about to get to.
You made me think of two things. What we really are as coaches is we're authority givers. We have an authority been given to us. We've been approved is what we've been. We've been approved. Yeah. We don't have to seek out approval. He's already approved us as his children, his beloved. And we get to give that same encouragement and reminder to others that we have been entrusted into our hands, that we have this authority. Well, and then, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
No, the other thing you said that hit me is, taking it. And you know what I'm talking about. There's been some things that right now we're taking it. And it's not easy. It's not fun. You want to say, why are we having to do this? Why isn't the other person But taking it, and I told this to your younger brother the other day, we're together, and I said, the biggest miracle I see right now in our family is the miracle of self-control. Because there's some situations that in the flesh, we don't want to have self-control. No. But being able to have it in moments that just don't make sense, that you think, there's no way I can do this. And Papa's saying, you're right. You cannot do it, but I can. Yeah. And so that authority, like you said, we have an authority that, what did he say to the disciples when he's getting ready to leave? And this is something, again, we've talked about. He said, I'm getting ready to leave. Like, why are you leaving? What? He says, I'm going to send a helper, which is the Spirit. And you, he's talking to them, he's talking to me and you will do greater things than I. Well, we all know what he did. Yeah. And we're going to do greater things. And Seth talked about that in his podcast, over in Africa. Yeah. And a lot of why we're not experiencing some of those things, this is my opinion, I'm talking about me, is because we think we have, we don't depend on the Papa the way we maybe others have to in other parts of the world, because we have things come to us a lot easier. We have a refrigerator full of food. We have a doctor that we can go to. We have a car that we can drive. Well, at some place they don't have any of that stuff. Yeah. Papa's the only answer. So you made me think about that when you were talking about authority so much. And
well, when you were talking, what popped in my head, Dad, was if you remember the Jalen Milroe story of his year with Nick Saban, the last year Nick Saban coached. And if it's wrong, forgive me, but I think they lose to USF, and everyone wants to say Jalen Milroe can't play. We're not gonna. He can't do it. He can't throw. Whatever people say. Once again, Nick Saban, who's the greatest football coach, or definitely college football, one of the top of all time, rides with him. Instead of pointing out all his weaknesses, works on trying to play to his strengths. And they end up getting, I think it was one play away from the national championship when they play Michigan. They lose, but they took someone who everyone written off, and they just kept getting better. And here in Alabama, they use the word, lank. Let everybody, what does it mean? Like, let everyone know, or something like that. Basically, we're not going to listen to what you're saying. We're going to know who we are. Not saying we're perfect. We got things to grow in, but we're going to focus on those things in the process of getting better, and the results will be what they are. It's that open anticipation. Like, we're going to trust, we believe in our process. We believe in time and things getting better. And in that case, he did get better, and he performed better than what everyone thought.
You said a great statement, and it's really one that we as believers should really sit down and think about. Are we playing to our strength? Do we really understand our strength, and are we playing to it, or are we listening to the stuff that, we've been talking about today that we can't do, right? You said Nick Saban said, hey, this is who our quarterback is. Let's play to his strength. Well, we are the beloved children of the King. He said that. What are our strengths that we should be playing to?
Trusting, believing, and being obedient. Those are things that lead to him showing up and taking care of. But we don't play to that strength. We try to do. We try to act, behave.
And we don't believe that we have it. We don't believe that we already have what he's given. And I'm going to use that as our segue into our last thing here, and then we'll get ready to wrap it up. But so at the end of the seventh day, in that waiting period, he looked like he had lost, right? He was crucified, life's over, everyone's going their own way, and we got the resurrection. Finding our identity and purpose beyond performance. The resurrection changed everything. Right? What was seen as a public failure and a final defeat is revealed as an ultimate victory. And that's what you and I keep talking about with Win Awakening. Being able to encourage one another to live from a victorious life. It's finished. Jesus took care of it.
Yeah.
And now we have the opportunity as beloved children to live out from a place of victory. Do we want to win on a scoreboard as a coach? Of course.
Yeah.
It's much more fun. You get a renewed contract, but that's not going to happen for everybody every time.
Yeah.
So what is it that you as a coach, you as a player, you as an administrator, what are you hanging your hat on that is the true victory? And that's where we're talking about with that I in the middle of win. If you don't have your identity secured, you may win on a scoreboard, but you're not going to win in life day to day from a standpoint of being able to be free and live from the place of victory.
Well, what jumped in my head, Dad, when you were talking about resurrection, God's really been talking to me about standing. Standing's a big thing, being able to stand in the midst of storms, standing. That's victory to me. Living out that victory is in the midst of a storm, you can stand firm. In Ephesians 6, it talks about put on the armor of God so you can stand when the time of troubles come, right? Well, what happens when something dies? You lay them down. What happens in the resurrection? He rises and he stands back up. And that's the beautiful thing about what an eternal coach can do is he has the ability to speak hope and life into people so that when people bury you, you have the ability to rise back up, be resilient, fight back, and fight back with your actions, with your heart, with your love. And what you do is nothing's off the table, is because some of your greatest haters end up being your most loyal followers because you stood the test. You stood. Once again, I don't want to get one way or the other here, but one of the greatest things Martin Luther King Jr. did, Dad, was he took what people the hatred in that time of white people, right? He took their abuse, right? And what it exposed was the heart of the people that was doing the abuse. Instead of fighting back, he let them look stronger, look like they were in the right. But what it ended up showing is people were able to see what was wrong with their hearts and their actions and what they were doing to people. And we were able to say, whoa, that's not right. And so the ability to stand in the midst of a storm ends up turning people's hearts. Love is the bridge, right, Dad? That can change a heart. And sometimes you have to be on the losing end first to get to the other end of the resurrection. Jesus had to die so that he could get to the other end. Some of these greatest coaches of all times, obviously Bill Belichick isn't the popular one now, but he was a Cleveland Brown before he ever was a New England Patriot, where he got fired. Bill Walsh couldn't get a job before he became Bill Walsh. The Steelers were terrible before the 70s rolled around. The biggest challenge is to quit. If I just don't quit, I keep moving. If I keep standing, even when I feel like I can't stand, we got to remember God is good. It doesn't mean it always works out the way you want, but what it means is that he's going to work good for your heart, for your mind, and sometimes that does show up on a scoreboard. sometimes it does show up, okay, in relationships or the way people view you, but it's definitely going to be good. And for that, I think we just got to hold on for the resurrection. And we've kind of jumped over this, but the Saturday was quiet. Could you imagine being a believer and all the thoughts that are going through your head? I just wasted 3 years of my life following this guy thinking he was the Son of God. I know what I saw, but, well, can you and I know, as a college coach, it's not necessarily always Sunday, but for a high school coach, that's Saturday. You're watching film and you're trying to come up with what you're going to say to your head coach, or you're trying to, how am I going to convince my players to run this same route? Just do the details this time. Or, you have to formulate an opinion on what to say and how to say it. Right. Well, that's a hard Saturday. Usually my wife would sit and tell you, those were some of the ugliest I've been to my kids. I've just been trying to make it through Sunday, and then I'll be kind again, which I'm not proud of, but it's the reality in which we work through. Right. Mm-hmm. And I think learning how to stand and having my identity frees me up, that my Saturdays aren't tied to what Friday night looked like as a high school coach, or what Saturday looked like. I'm literally, I can walk in there and I can be the ray of sunshine or hope to the coaches around me, or hey guys, I know we were disappointed with how that is. I'm disappointed too, but that's not who we are. We can focus on these drills to really try to get better. And once again, that leads to growth, which leads to change of outcomes, right? When we can really attack what's the problem. But you, Dad, been a coach. I've been a coach too. A lot of times we don't attack the real problem. We attack our emotions and feelings and blame. We point fingers and we betray people. And that's what we spend time fixing on a Sunday, instead of, okay, let's address, we didn't step to this time on the clock on our footwork. We fumbled the ball here. Or, we didn't over exaggerate with our eyes watching the ball in, or we didn't push the right depth. So we missed that completion, or we didn't do this ball. So now let's intentionally put this practice period in so we can fix this. So we lose our minds on Saturday is what I'm trying to say. And, but the beautiful thing of football is 1 week's done, we got a new week. It's like you wash clean. Well, the resurrection is the beautiful picture of he's shown that authority that we were mocking him about walking in on Friday. We're spitting and we're like, where are you? Get off the cross. He said, I'm obedient to my Father. It's just not time yet. I'm going to do his will, and his right time. You're going to see who has all power and authority, and it will save your life.
I don't know why it came to my mind when you're talking, but I think that the greatest thing we have the opportunity as coaches and people in life in general, but we're talking football, sports, is the ability to revive one another's heart.
Yeah.
And that's what I see happening in the resurrection. Our hearts were revived. His disciples' hearts were revived to say, we didn't lose.
Yeah.
We are victorious in him. And I think that's what we carry with us as we walk through our days of life here on this earth. So just a couple takeaways for you to think about as we get ready to close. Identity. We talked a lot about identity. And if you are listening to this today and you're like, I still don't understand what they mean when they're talking about identity, then reach out to us at Win Awakening. And we'd love to have the opportunity to have a conversation with you. You can go to our website at winawakening.org and find out everything you need to reach us. We talked about labels, and I like to use the word opinion. So when you think you are labeled, whose opinion are you going to listen to? Are you going to listen to the opinion of those that are outside? Or are you going to listen to Papa's opinion where he says, you are my beloved child now? Pressure. Is the pressure we put on ourselves the reason we struggle? Because we're listening to, again, other voices, the noise outside. And then purpose. What is your purpose in life? What was Christ's purpose? And that is that we might walk in victory, that we might walk out of the truth of who he says we are. And so, Austin, is there anything you want to share before we close it up here? It's been a great conversation. I think a lot to chew on. It's amazing how, when we were sitting there last week, just looking at football and all the different things of the weekend, and then thinking about, man, this is exactly what Jesus went through in his Holy Week and triumphal entry coming in, and on the way out, crucify him. And a lot of the stuff that happened in between. So hopefully coaches and athletes, when they look at this, they're going to see a lot of parallels and hopefully be encouraged of how they can walk out their week as a coach. But anything you got, final words?
I guess my final words is God simplified identity for me. There's a lot of words to describe it, but the identity we have is that we're beloved by him. And when you understand that you're beloved, what comes with him? Authority, power, toughness, resiliency,
peace.
Hope, peace. Well, when you get him and you realize him loves you, you can stand through a lot of tough things. And I think Jesus modeled that the best. And I think that's something he's calling us to do, because when the greatest things we hype up in this world, the things that we love to celebrate, are those stories of comebacks. We love comeback stories. We don't like when they're down in the dirt, but we love the comeback story. Well, you need identity to have a comeback story, because if you don't have identity, there's no coming back, because you'll just be buried down in the dirt. But because of what Christ done and the love of the Father for us and the Spirit we have in us, that's what gives us the ability to do the comeback story that everyone loves. So don't buy into the media or the fickle fan. Remember that you are loved by your Creator, and he has given you everything you need for godliness and to live this life out here on this earth. And we can walk into whatever challenge that you're in right in this moment. God knows that we're in our own challenges, right, Dad? But, Dad, no lie, and I'm sorry because I know we're trying to end, but what was really cool last night was I literally talked to Lauren. We're sitting having dinner, and I said, I really feel a sense of peace and gratitude right now for what God's been doing for me. That's of him, and that's been his love and kindness through some suffering over the last few years to bring me to a point of feeling that. Just ability to sit and eat dinner in a moment and just feel complete contentment. Not saying I'm going to live that out perfectly forever, but what I'm saying is I'm starting to recognize that identity and what that can do to free you up to be the best version of yourself, which that's what changes the world, is when we, one moment at a time, live out of the identity and authority that God has given us through him and his Son.
Wow. Well, I know this. I enjoyed our time together this morning. I knew last week it was going to be good, and we started to talk about it. So Austin and I would just like to thank all our listeners for joining us today at Awaken Kingdom Culture, where hearts and minds come alive, one story at a time.